The security badge reader blinked red 3 times before the error message appeared. Access DNID credentials revoked. Standing there in the executive corridor of Obsidian Infrastructure headquarters, laptop bag still slung over my shoulder, the reality of what just happened started to sink in. 20 minutes ago, I'd been in the server room completing the final authentication protocols for the biggest deal in our company's history. Now, I couldn't even get into the boardroom where that very deal was supposed to close. "There's been a mistake," I said to the young man blocking the doorway, though I already knew there hadn't been. His expression made that clear. "No mistake," Blake Hutchinson replied, his tone dripping with the kind of confidence that comes from never facing real consequences. "Your hardware profile is ancient history. The architecture team doesn't need legacy specialists anymore. We're moving in a different direction." He stepped forward, forcing me to take a step back. "So clear out. We have actual decision makers arriving any minute." Blake was 32, maybe 33, 3 years younger than me. He joined Obsidian Infrastructure 6 months ago after his father, Graham Hutchinson, acquired controlling interest in the company. Blake's title was Chief Innovation Officer, though everyone knew what that really meant. He was being groomed to take over, learning the business from the top down, which would have been fine, except he had no intention of actually learning anything. Behind him, through the glass walls of the boardroom, I could see the presentation I'd spent 6 weeks preparing. My slides, my infrastructure diagrams, my security protocols. The entire cloud migration strategy that would move Stratosphere Data Alliance's operations onto our platform. A $4.2 billion contract that would triple Obsidian Infrastructure's valuation overnight. "Blake, I'm the lead architect on this project." I kept my voice level. "Randall Monroe from Stratosphere is expecting me to walk him through the technical specifications. The authentication frameworks, the redundancy protocols. Were you not listening?" Blake cut me off. "I said we're going in a different direction. My team has updated everything. Your approach was too conservative, too focused on old-school security models. Monroe wants innovation, not paranoia." The elevator chimed behind me. Blake's eyes flicked past my shoulder and his whole demeanor shifted, shoulders back, chin up, salesmanship smile activated. "Mr. Monroe," Blake's voice boomed with artificial warmth. "Welcome to Obsidian Infrastructure. I'm Blake Hutchinson, Chief Innovation Officer. We're thrilled to finalize this partnership." I turned. Randall Monroe stepped off the elevator, flanked by 2 executives I recognized from video calls. His Chief Technology Officer, Amanda Sheffield, and Chief Security Officer, Kyle Brennan. Monroe was in his late 50s, silver-haired, with the kind of presence that came from building a multi-billion-dollar company from scratch. His eyes swept the corridor, landing on me with recognition. "Miss Delacroix," he nodded, then looked at Blake with confusion. "Is there a problem? We're ready to begin the technical review." Blake didn't miss a beat. "Actually, Mr. Monroe, we've made some exciting improvements to the proposal. I'll be personally walking you through our enhanced infrastructure design. Elena was just leaving, she's transitioning to other projects." That was my name, Elena Delacroix, Senior Cloud Architect at Obsidian Infrastructure. Or at least, I had been an hour ago. Welcome to Payback Office, where we share stories about professional justice and the moment when corporate bullies realize they've made a career-ending mistake. What happened in that corridor became the most expensive 10-minute conversation in Obsidian Infrastructure's history. And if you want to see how spectacularly Blake Hutchinson's arrogance collapsed, you'll want to stay for this entire story. Before we get into how this disaster unfolded, if you appreciate content about workplace karma and standing up to corporate nepotism, consider subscribing. We're building a community working towards 6,000 subscribers, people who believe competence should matter more than connections. But no pressure, just glad you're here for this one. So, Elena Delacroix, that's me. 35 years old, born and raised in Minneapolis by parents who taught me that respect isn't about status, it's about recognizing the humanity in everyone you meet. My father managed a logistics warehouse. My mother was a school nurse. Neither of them had college degrees, but both understood something that Blake Hutchinson never would. The people doing the actual work deserve to be heard. That background shaped how I led teams, how I treated junior developers, how I never forgot that the night shift system administrators keeping servers running at 3 a.m. were just as essential as any C-suite executive. I joined Obsidian Infrastructure 8 years ago, back when we were a scrappy firm with 40 employees and big ambitions. I was employee number 37. I'd built our cloud infrastructure from the ground up, designed our security architecture, mentored a dozen engineers who'd gone on to leadership roles. When Graham Hutchinson bought the company 6 months ago, I'd been cautiously optimistic. Capital infusion meant growth, better resources, bigger opportunities. Then Blake arrived, and within weeks, the culture started to rot. But this moment in the corridor, this was different. This wasn't just about ego or office politics. This was Blake actively sabotaging the most critical deal in company history because he couldn't tolerate not being the smartest person in the room. Monroe's expression shifted into something harder to read. I appreciate innovation, Mr. Hutchinson, but we've spent 6 weeks reviewing Miss Delacroix's architecture. Our security team has vetted every protocol. Our compliance officers have signed off on her framework, unless there's been a fundamental change I'm not aware of. Improvements, not changes, Blake said smoothly. Elena did solid foundational work, but we've optimized the approach. More efficient, more scalable, more aligned with cutting-edge cloud paradigms. I caught Amanda Sheffield's eye. The Stratosphere CTO looked concerned. During our technical deep dives over the past month and a half, we developed a working rapport. She knew the architecture inside and out. She also knew that last-minute changes to enterprise cloud infrastructure were red flags, not selling points. What kind of optimizations? Sheffield asked. Blake gestured toward the boardroom. Why don't we sit down? I'll walk everyone through the enhanced design. Elena, you're dismissed. That was when I made a decision. I could have walked away. Should have, probably. Gone to HR, called my attorney, filed complaints through proper channels. But something in Randall Monroe's expression told me he needed to understand exactly what was happening. And more importantly, I needed to know if Blake had actually touched my infrastructure. Mr. Monroe? I spoke directly to the Stratosphere CEO, ignoring Blake entirely. Before we begin, I need to ask. Do you have Master Cloud clearance credentials with you? Monroe's eyebrows raised slightly. The access codes you sent over yesterday? Yes, my team has them. Why? I smiled, though there was no warmth in it. My eyes moved to Blake. Because he expelled me from this meeting. Which means, per our security protocols, I've initiated infrastructure lockdown. The entire cloud network is now in secured status. No access, no migration, no deal closure until I manually restore clearance. The silence in that corridor could have suffocated someone. Blake's face went through several color changes. What are you talking about? You can't just... Section 7, Paragraph 4 of the security framework, I said calmly. Any lead architect removed from a project for cause must immediately secure their infrastructure to prevent unauthorized access or modification. It's automatic. The moment you revoked my credentials and dismissed me from the team, the lockdown triggered. Kyle Brennan, Stratosphere's chief security officer, actually laughed. She's right. I remember that clause. We specifically approved it because it prevents exactly this scenario, unauthorized personnel making changes to critical infrastructure. Blake's face was now approaching crimson. I'm not unauthorized personnel. I'm the chief innovation officer. With no administrative access to the cloud environment Miss Delacroix built, Sheffield said, pulling out her tablet. I'm showing system status as locked. Everything's in read-only mode. She looked at Blake with something between pity and disgust. You just bricked a $4.2 billion deal. This is insane. Blake turned to Monroe. Sir, I apologize for this unprofessional behavior. This is clearly sabotage. I'll have our IT team override her lockdown immediately and, with what credentials? I asked. I'm the only administrator with master access keys. That was a specific requirement from Stratosphere's security team, single point of accountability during migration setup, to prevent exactly the kind of optimizations you're describing. Monroe was staring at Blake with an expression I recognized. I'd seen it before on executives' faces, the exact moment they realized someone they'd been negotiating with was incompetent. It was a look of reassessment, calculation, and anger. Let me make sure I understand. Monroe's voice had gone very quiet, which was somehow more intimidating than shouting. You removed the lead architect from this project, the only person with access credentials to the infrastructure we're purchasing, 30 minutes before our deal closure meeting? It's not. She's exaggerating the situation, Blake stammered. We can work around this. My team can rebuild access, or we can bring in our parent company's enterprise specialists, or rebuild access to a secured cloud environment. Brennan shook his head. That would take weeks. Months if she built it properly, and any forced override would compromise the entire security framework, which would violate our compliance requirements. We couldn't legally migrate our data onto a platform that's been breached. Amanda Sheffield was typing rapidly on her tablet. I'm showing that the presentation files are also locked. Whatever enhanced design you were planning to show us, Mr. Hutchinson, we can't access it. That's when Blake made his second massive mistake. Instead of apologizing, instead of trying to de-escalate, he turned on me with pure venom. You vindictive, this is corporate sabotage. I'll have you arrested. You're holding our infrastructure hostage, extorting the company. I'm following protocol, I said quietly. a protocol that Stratosphere Data Alliance specifically required and approved. If I'm still terminated from this project, I'll spend the next 72 hours documenting the handoff process and working with whoever you designate as the new lead architect. But that's a 72-hour minimum for proper security transfer. Industry standard. Monroe raised a hand, cutting off whatever Blake was about to say next. Mr. Hutchinson, I need to speak with your father. Now. My father is in Europe on business, then get him on a video call. Because right now, I'm trying to decide whether Stratosphere Data Alliance has any business partnering with Obsidian Infrastructure at all. The color drained from Blake's face. Sir, I'm sure we can resolve this misunderstanding. There's no misunderstanding, Sheffield said. You fired the lead architect on a $4.2 billion project without verifying who had critical access. That's not a misunderstanding. That's catastrophically bad judgment. Blake looked around desperately, as if someone might materialize to rescue him. The handful of Obsidian Infrastructure employees who'd gathered in the corridor quickly found reasons to be elsewhere. Nobody wanted to be associated with this disaster. Elena, Monroe turned to me, his tone completely different. I apologize for this situation. Can you give me an honest assessment? Is this deal salvageable today? I considered the question, professionally, dispassionately, the way I'd been trained to assess crisis situations. Technically, yes, I can restore access in about 15 minutes. The infrastructure is solid, nothing's been damaged, just secured. We can proceed with the original presentation and timeline. I paused. But Mr. Monroe, you need to understand what Blake meant when he said his team made optimizations. Enlighten me. 3 days ago, I was copied on an email thread, accidentally, I think, where Blake was discussing streamlining our security protocols. Specifically, he wanted to reduce the encryption layers on data transmission to improve speed benchmarks. He also suggested eliminating redundant backup systems to cut costs. Kyle Brennan's face went pale. Please tell me he didn't implement any of that. He didn't have access to implement anything, but those were the improvements he was planning to present today. Faster speeds, lower costs, more impressive demo metrics. I met Monroe's eyes. And absolutely none of it would have met your compliance requirements. The first security audit would have failed. You would have been legally prohibited from storing client data on our platform. The silence stretched out. Amanda Sheffield broke it. He was going to blow up a $4.2 billion deal to make the demo look flashier. I don't think he understood that's what he was doing, I said. I think he genuinely believed security protocols were just red tape, unnecessary complexity that people like me add to justify our jobs. Monroe turned to Blake with an expression of absolute contempt. Is that true? Blake's mouth opened and closed several times. The encryption layers do slow down performance. I was trying to find a balance between security and efficiency. There is no balance. Brennan exploded. We're a data consortium. We manage healthcare records, financial transactions, personal information for 200 million users. Security isn't negotiable. I understand that. I just thought. You didn't think, Monroe cut him off. That's the problem. Elena, if you're willing, I'd like to proceed with the original presentation. Your design, your protocols, your team. Of course, I said. And Mr. Hutchinson, Monroe's voice could have cut glass, you're going to sit in that boardroom silently and observe what professional competence looks like. Then you're going to call your father and explain why Stratosphere Data Alliance's partnership with Obsidian Infrastructure now includes a contractual requirement that you have zero involvement in any technical decisions. Blake's face was ashen. You can't, I can, and I will. Those are the terms, take them or we walk. Monroe checked his watch. You have 30 seconds to decide. Blake looked at me with pure hatred, but he nodded. Good, Monroe said. Elena, whenever you're ready. I pulled out my phone and opened the secure admin app. My fingers moved through the authentication sequence I'd performed hundreds of times. Biometric scan, rotating passkey, secondary verification. The system status changed from red to amber to green. Access restored, I said. Welcome to Obsidian Infrastructure, Mr. Monroe. I apologize for the delay. The boardroom meeting lasted 3 hours. I walked Randall Monroe, Amanda Sheffield, and Kyle Brennan through every aspect of the cloud infrastructure. The redundant security layers that Blake had wanted to eliminate. The encryption protocols that met healthcare and financial industry standards. The backup systems that guaranteed 99.99% uptime. The scalability frameworks that would let Stratosphere grow without rebuilding architecture. Blake sat in the corner, silent, watching his authority evaporate with each slide. Sheffield asked detailed technical questions. Brennan stress-tested the security scenarios. Monroe listened, occasionally interjecting with business considerations. It was the meeting I'd prepared for, professional, thorough, collaborative. At the end, Monroe stood and extended his hand. Alina, this is exceptional work. Amanda, Kyle, any concerns? Both executives shook their heads. Sheffield actually smiled. This is the most robust enterprise cloud architecture I've reviewed in 5 years. I feel completely confident migrating our operations. Then we have a deal, Monroe said. Alina, I assume you'll be our primary point of contact during implementation? That's typically how we structure these projects, yes. Good. I'll feel much better knowing you're overseeing the technical execution. He glanced at Blake. I'd like to speak with Graham Hutchinson about personnel assignments before we finalize the contract, but the technical framework is approved. After Stratosphere's team left, Blake and I stood alone in the boardroom. The late afternoon sun slanted through the windows, illuminating the presentation screen, still showing my final slide. Blake's voice was low, venomous. You think you've won something here? My father owns this company. One call from me and you're finished. Maybe, I acknowledged, but that call is going to be really interesting. You'll have to explain how you nearly destroyed a $4.2 billion deal because you couldn't tolerate someone else being more competent than you. You'll have to explain why Stratosphere now requires contractual language keeping you away from technical decisions. You'll have to explain why the client trusts me more than they trust his son. You sabotaged me. I did my job, I said quietly. I built infrastructure that works. I established security protocols that protect client data. I created safeguards to prevent unauthorized changes. That's not sabotage, Blake. That's competence. Something you might consider developing instead of coasting on your father's money. His hand actually twitched toward me, and for a second I thought he might do something catastrophically stupid, but he caught himself. Get out, he hissed. Gladly, I have implementation timeline documents to prepare. I gathered my materials and headed toward my office on the 3rd floor. My phone buzzed halfway down the corridor, a security alert from the infrastructure monitoring system. I pulled it out and my stomach dropped. Unauthorized access attempt, server room 2 billion multiple failed authentication, attempts physical breach, detected I broke into a run, taking the stairs 2 at a time down to the server floor. The secure door to server room 2 billion was propped open with a doorstop, and I could hear voices inside, Blake's, and another I recognized as Justin Kellerman, head of IT operations for Hutchinson Holdings, Graham's parent company. I yanked the door open. Blake and Kellerman were standing in front of the main server rack, Kellerman's laptop connected directly to the infrastructure backbone via an emergency maintenance port. What the hell are you doing? I demanded. Blake spun around, his face flushed with anger and something else, desperation. Getting back what's mine. Justin's overriding your lockdown protocols. In about 2 minutes, I'll have full administrative access and you'll be the one locked out. Kellerman looked uncomfortable. Blake, this really isn't? Keep working, Blake snapped. I pulled out my phone, fingers flying across the emergency response screen. Justin, you have 15 seconds to disconnect that laptop before the system triggers a catastrophic security breach protocol. Every alarm in this building will activate, all data will cascade to offsite backup, and this entire server farm will shut down. She's bluffing, Blake said, but his voice wavered. Am I? I held up my phone so they could see the countdown timer. 11 seconds. This is a federal compliance requirement, Blake. Any unauthorized physical access to servers containing protected health information triggers mandatory breach response. That means we have to report this to Stratosphere, who has to report it to federal regulators, who will fine both companies millions of dollars. Your father will lose the deal, face regulatory penalties, and probably lose his data handling license. 8 seconds. Kellerman's hands froze over his keyboard. Blake, she's right, if this registers as a breach. She's trying to scare you. She won't actually. 5 seconds. I tapped the screen. The countdown stopped at 4 seconds. Then I pressed the manual escalation button. Alarms erupted throughout the building. Red emergency lighting flooded the server room. Kellerman yanked his laptop cable out so fast he knocked over a tool bag. Blake's face went from red to pale in an instant. You're insane, he shouted over the alarms. I was already on my phone, dialing building security. This is Alina Delacroix, Senior Cloud Architect. I have an unauthorized breach in server room 2 billion. Send security immediately. Yes, I'll stay on the line. Footsteps thundered down the corridor. 3 security guards burst through the door, hands on their equipment belts. Miss Delacroix? The lead guard asked. I pointed at Kellerman's laptop, still connected by a dangling cable. Unauthorized system access attempt. I need this room secured, that equipment confiscated as evidence, and both of these men escorted from the building. Evidence? Blake sputtered. You can't, I work here. You authorized a physical breach of a secured server environment containing protected client data, I said coldly. That's a federal crime, Blake. I have to report this. It's not optional. The security guards looked at each other. Blake was the CEO's son, but I was the one with authority over the server infrastructure, and they knew it. Sir, you'll need to come with us, the lead guard said to Blake. Call my father, Blake demanded. Call him right now. We will, sir, after we secure the scene. They escorted Blake and Kellerman out. I stayed behind, running diagnostics on every system Kellerman's laptop had touched. The access attempt had been crude, trying to brute force override the authentication system. He hadn't gotten far, but the attempt itself was enough to trigger every compliance protocol we had. My phone rang. Graham Hutchinson. Elena, what's happening? Security just called me about alarms and my son being detained. Blake attempted to physically breach the server room with an outside contractor, I said. They were trying to override security protocols by connecting directly to the infrastructure backbone. I have it on security footage and system logs. Silence. Then, quietly, is the stratosphere data compromised? No. I stopped them before they accessed anything critical, but we have to report the attempt. Federal law? I understand. Graham's voice was strained. Do what you need to do. I'll be on the next flight back. The fallout took 3 days to fully materialize. Graham Hutchinson returned from Europe and had a 5-hour meeting with Randall Monroe. Nobody knows exactly what was said, but the outcome was clear. Blake was removed from any role involving client relations or technical decisions. His title remained the same Chief Innovation Officer, but it was now an empty designation. He had an office, a salary, and absolutely no authority. Meanwhile, Monroe insisted on a contract amendment that gave me direct oversight of the Stratosphere implementation, with a provision that I couldn't be removed from the project without Stratosphere's written approval. Essentially, Obsidian Infrastructure couldn't fire me without jeopardizing their biggest client. Graham Hutchinson, to his credit, understood business realities. He pulled me into his office 4 days after the server room incident. Elena, I owe you an apology, he said without preamble. I put my son in a position he wasn't ready for, and he nearly cost us everything. That's on me. I appreciate that, Mr. Hutchinson. Randall Monroe spoke very highly of you. Said you're the only reason he's still willing to do business with us. He also suggested, strongly, that we restructure your role and compensation to reflect your actual value to this company. He slid a folder across the desk. Inside was an offer letter. VP of Cloud Architecture. Significant salary increase. Equity stake in Obsidian Infrastructure. Guaranteed seat in technical decision-making for all major contracts. This is contingent on the successful Stratosphere implementation, Graham continued. But Monroe seems confident you'll deliver. Are you interested? I took 24 hours to consider it. Not because I wasn't interested, but because I needed to make sure this wasn't just crisis management. I needed to know if Obsidian Infrastructure was actually changing, or if this was temporary appeasement that would evaporate once the Stratosphere deal was safely closed. I scheduled calls with Amanda Sheffield and Kyle Brennan. Both confirmed that their leadership wanted me specifically involved in the long-term partnership. Sheffield even mentioned that Stratosphere was considering additional cloud projects that could be worth another $3 billion over 5 years if they had confidence in the technical team. That was leverage, real, concrete leverage. I went back to Graham Hutchinson with a counteroffer. VP title, yes. Salary and equity, yes. But I also wanted authority to restructure the engineering team, hire additional senior architects, and establish technical review protocols that prevented anyone, including Blake, from making infrastructure decisions without proper vetting. Graham agreed to everything. Blake, predictably, was furious. He went to his father demanding my termination, claiming I'd humiliated him, undermined his authority, poisoned his client relationships. Graham's response, according to office gossip, was devastating. You humiliated yourself. Elena just refused to cover for your incompetence. The Stratosphere Data Alliance migration took 9 months. It was complex, meticulous work, exactly the kind of project that couldn't be rushed or simplified. We moved 847 terabytes of data, established security protocols across 14 regional data centers, integrated with Stratosphere's existing systems, and stress-tested every possible failure scenario. Blake had no involvement. He'd show up to the office, attend meetings he wasn't invited to speak at, and basically serve as a cautionary tale about the difference between authority and competence. About 6 months into the implementation, I was working late in the Infrastructure Command Center, a secure room where we monitored system performance, when Amanda Sheffield stopped by for an on-site review. Got a minute? She asked. Of course. She settled into a chair, looking at the monitoring displays showing real-time data flow. I wanted to thank you, not just for the technical work, which has been flawless, but for what happened in that corridor. I'm not sure I understand. Blake Hutchinson tried to steamroll you, tried to use his position to override your expertise, and you didn't back down, you didn't get emotional or defensive. You just calmly demonstrated why you were right and he was wrong. Sheffield smiled. That matters, especially for women in tech leadership. The number of times I've watched talented women get bulldozed by mediocre men with confidence. She trailed off. You showed a different path, stand on competence, document everything, build systems that protect good work. I just did what made sense professionally, I said. That's exactly my point. You treated it as a professional problem with professional solutions, not a personality conflict or ego battle. Blake made it personal. You kept it professional. That's why you won. The Stratosphere implementation launched successfully on schedule. 0 security breaches. 99.97% uptime in the first 3 months. Client satisfaction scores that exceeded every benchmark. Randall Monroe sent a company-wide email to Obsidian Infrastructure praising the technical team and specifically mentioning my leadership. Graham Hutchinson forwarded it to me with a 3-word message. Thank you. Blake sent nothing. But 2 weeks after the successful launch, he stopped coming to the office. Officially, he was pursuing other opportunities. Unofficially, Graham had finally accepted that his son didn't have the temperament or skills for a leadership role in a technical company. Blake was transitioned into a position at one of Graham's real estate holding companies, something where his instincts for shortcuts and showmanship would be less catastrophic. I didn't celebrate his departure. Honestly, I felt a little sorry for him. Blake had been set up to fail by a father who gave him authority without requiring him to develop competence. That's a recipe for exactly the kind of disaster that unfolded in that corridor. But I didn't dwell on it either. There was too much actual work to do. The success of the Stratosphere implementation brought additional opportunities. Other enterprise clients saw what we'd built and wanted similar infrastructure. Within a year, my team grew from 8 engineers to 32. We took on projects for healthcare systems, financial institutions, and government agencies. Each one was complex, demanding, and deeply satisfying. I made a point of mentoring the junior engineers the way I'd been mentored, teaching them not just technical skills, but how to navigate corporate politics without compromising their integrity, how to document decisions to protect good work, how to stand firm on professional standards while remaining collaborative. Several of them had asked about the Blake incident. It had become something of a legend in the company. I always gave the same answer. Build systems so good that removing you creates immediate, obvious problems. That's not job security through gatekeeping. That's job security through excellence. 3 years after that corridor confrontation, Obsidian Infrastructure was acquired by a major tech conglomerate for $8.7 billion. The Stratosphere contract and subsequent enterprise cloud business were cited as primary assets in the acquisition. Graham Hutchinson made a fortune. So did everyone with equity stakes, including me. At the acquisition celebration, Graham pulled me aside. "You know what's funny?" he said. "If Blake had just let you run that meeting, none of this would have happened. Not the Stratosphere expansion, not the additional contracts, not the acquisition. He tried to take credit for your work, and instead he created the circumstances that let everyone see exactly how valuable you were." That's one way to look at it. It's the only way to look at it. You saved this company. Then you built it into something worth billions. He raised his glass. "Thank you, Alina. I don't know what happened to Blake after the acquisition. Last I heard, he was working in luxury real estate development in Miami, which honestly seemed like a better fit for his skills and temperament. Some people are meant to build things, others are meant to sell them. Blake had finally found his proper role. As for me, I took my equity payout and started my own cloud security consulting firm. Small, specialized, focused on helping companies build infrastructure that prioritizes security and reliability over flashy DMOS. Several of the engineers I'd mentored at Obsidian Infrastructure joined me. We work with clients who understand that the cheapest solution is rarely the best solution, who value expertise over credentials, who recognize that the person doing the actual technical work might know more than the executive with the impressive title. It's slower growth than venture-funded startups. We'll never be a unicorn valued at billions, but every system we build works. Every client we take on gets infrastructure they can trust. And nobody on my team will ever be excluded from a boardroom because someone's insecure son decided they were a threat. The morning Blake tried to kick me out of that meeting, I'd arrived at work thinking it would be a normal day. A big presentation, sure, but routine in its structure. I had no idea I was about to face a career-defining moment, the kind where every decision matters and the consequences cascade for years. Standing in that corridor, watching Blake's smug face as he revoked my credentials, I had a choice. I could have been professional in the compliant sense, walked away quietly, filed complaints, trusted the system to eventually correct the injustice. A lot of people would have made that choice. It's safer, less confrontational, but I'd built safeguards into my work specifically to prevent unauthorized changes. I'd established protocols that protected infrastructure integrity. Using them wasn't sabotage or insubordination. It was following the exact procedures that Stratosphere Data Alliance had approved because they understood the risks of letting unqualified people make technical decisions. Blake thought he was asserting authority. Actually, he was creating a test case that proved why those safeguards existed. The most satisfying part wasn't watching him fail. It was watching Randall Monroe, Amanda Sheffield, and Kyle Brennan recognize competence when they saw it. They didn't care about office politics or corporate hierarchy. They cared about whether the infrastructure would work, whether their data would be secure, whether the person leading the project knew what they were doing. When Blake tried to override my expertise with his authority, he inadvertently created the perfect demonstration of why expertise matters more. That's the real lesson from this whole situation. Not that karma exists or bullies always get punished, though in this case, Blake certainly faced consequences. The real lesson is that genuinely good work creates its own protection. When you build systems that work, document your decisions, maintain professional standards, and develop real expertise, you become difficult to replace. Not because you're gatekeeping or holding knowledge hostage, but because replacing you would mean rebuilding everything you've created. Blake never understood that. He thought power came from titles and family connections. He learned, painfully, that actual power comes from being so good at what you do that removing you creates immediate, expensive problems. I still think about that moment sometimes. Standing in the corridor, watching the error message flash on the security reader, feeling that spike of anger and humiliation. The temptation to just leave, to let Blake crash and burn without warning. But I didn't do it for him. I did it for Randall Monroe, who'd spent 6 weeks in good faith reviewing my work. For Amanda Sheffield and Kyle Brennan, who'd collaborated professionally on technical requirements. For the engineers on my team who'd worked late nights getting everything perfect. For the principle that competence should matter more than connections. Blake was just the obstacle. The real story was about everyone else recognizing what actual professional excellence looked like. If you've made it this far, thank you for investing time in this story. If workplace justice and professional integrity matter to you, I'd be grateful if you'd subscribe. We're working towards 6,000 subscribers, building a community that believes competence and character should define careers, not politics and privilege. Whether you subscribe or not, I appreciate you being here for this. The tech industry loves to talk about disruption and innovation. Those are important, but reliability matters too. Security matters, expertise matters. The unglamorous work of building systems that function correctly under stress, that matters more than most people realize until something breaks. Blake wanted innovation without understanding infrastructure. Speed without security. Authority without expertise. That's not innovation. That's recklessness. The boardroom he tried to exclude me from became the place where everyone saw the difference. And sometimes, that's all the payback you need.